So of the three laws, Newton's third law is by far the most misunderstood one, and the most counterintuitive law that there is. You've probably heard this stated before in formal language. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. If I apply a force on a bowling ball, it'll apply a force back on me in the other direction. Maybe you've had a physics teacher that successfully taught that to you. Then why does it leave us with surprising responses to questions like this? So suppose a car crashes into a wall. We want to know which is bigger, the force of the wall pushing on the car, or the force of the car pushing on the wall. I ask my students this, and it's obvious to all my students and to anybody who looks at this that the wall applies a much bigger force on the car than the car does on the wall. Car versus wall, wall wins. Car is messed up, wall's probably fine. If you crash a truck into a golf cart, where's there a bigger force? Is there a bigger force of the truck pushing on the golf cart or the golf cart pushing on the truck? Again, the answer is absolutely obvious to most adults, all of my students, that the force of the truck applies to the golf cart is much bigger than the force of the golf cart applies to the truck. Because again, between the truck and the golf cart, the truck wins. But your intuitive answer on both of these is wrong. For in both cases, the forces are equal. The reason why we think that the wall applies a bigger force on the car than the car on the wall is, again, the car gets more damaged. If we have a big, strong wall, the wall's not going to move, its acceleration is going to not be happening, whereas the car accelerates a lot in the other direction. The car actually stops. Why is that the case? The wall is attached to the ground, so it has a very large amount of mass. If you think of it as being rigidly attached to the earth, then basically what you're trying to do when the car smashes into the wall is you're kind of trying to move the entire earth. The earth has an enormous, unimaginable amount of mass to it, so the acceleration is very small. The car's mass is still pretty big, but compared to the mass of the entire earth that we're trying to move, it's not very much. So the car's acceleration is going to be a lot larger than the acceleration of the wall. The other reason we mistake this, we notice that the car is probably a lot more damaged than the wall is the materials involved. So the materials in the cars are actually designed to crumple. You have crumple zones. The idea is they absorb the impact. The result of this is that the acceleration on the passengers is reduced because you are slowing your passengers down over a larger time. So as a result, you get a smaller force. So that's the other thing that's happening, is the materials. The wall's materials are not designed to crumple. They're designed to be very high strength. The car has pieces of it that intentionally do crumple. Same thing's going on with the golf cart and the truck. Obviously, the golf cart bounces off the truck, goes flying. If you had to choose to be in a car accident involved here, would you rather be in the truck or the golf cart? Obviously the truck, because the golf cart has a lot more acceleration that bounces right off. But again, it's not because it's got a bigger force. That's what we think. It's because it's got a bigger acceleration. Well, why is it that the golf cart accelerates so much more, even though I'm playing with the forces of the second? So remember Newton's second law. Newton's second law is a formal statement of common sense, that things with more mass won't accelerate as much. If I apply the same force on a tennis ball and a bowling ball, the tennis ball will move a lot more than the bowling ball does. So mass and acceleration are inversely proportional. We know this. This is a very intuitive law. The problem is that we take our intuition, which is the ideas we've built up in our heads, and apply them in situations like this, and assume that because the golf cart goes ricocheting off and accelerates a lot more, it's got to have a bigger force on it. That's one of the intuitive parts of Newton's second law. More force makes the thing accelerate more. We know that. That's intuition. The harder you push on something, the more it accelerates. The problem is that the bigger acceleration here is not a result of the force being bigger. The bigger acceleration of the golfing cart is a result of only the mass being smaller. So same amount of force in both examples, on the truck, on the golf cart, but a much smaller mass makes the acceleration a lot bigger. So what we do is we see this effect. We see the motion. We see the motion, or we see how much damage is caused to the object, and we infer intuitively that the effect of how much motion something has, how much acceleration it has, or how much damage it has, is a result of the cause of a different amount of force, but it's actually not. Another example of this common misconception of Newton's third law is, this is a tractor trailer. Suppose I want to use a tractor to pull something. Which is going to be bigger? The force of the front piece, called the tractor, which is pulling forwards on the back piece, called the trailer. So this is the force on the trailer, on the tractor pulling. But of course, you can imagine that this thing, the tractor, it's trying to move. This tractor is not going to move as fast if it's towing something as if it had nothing to tow. Of course, it makes sense. There's some kind of a force backwards on the tractor. Which of these forces is larger? So again, common sense tells us, obviously, this has to be a bigger force than this. Because between the tractor and the tractor wins. The truck actually really does move. It really does accelerate forwards. And yet, you already know by now that your intuition is wrong. That this force and this force are actually equal sides. The harder the tractor pulls in the trailer, the harder the trailer pulls back. I presented this to a friend of mine, and she says, that doesn't make any sense. How can motion ever happen if the forces are always equal and opposite? If this force always gets bigger every time this force gets bigger, nothing ever moves. It's impossible. So the solution to this paradox is to consider all the forces involved. So if you think about the trailer as being a relatively low friction thing, if I look at all the forces on it, I've got a force pushing upwards on it from the ground, force pulling downwards on it from gravity, from the earth, so they cancel. So if I'm only looking at horizontal forces, then maybe it'll be kind of a small friction force acting backwards from the rolling friction of tires. But overall, there's a pretty big force forwards. Look at the overall force on the tractor. You do have a force backwards on it from the trailer. But the other thing that's going on is that the tractor's got an engine. The engine is turning your drive shaft. The drive shaft is connected to your transmission, which in turn is turning your wheels. So there's this elaborate system of rotating things and gears and transaxles. What am I looking for? Differentials that result in the wheels being used to apply a force forwards. So this is the force, you could say, from the engine, the force from the wheels, somehow within the internal magic of how a car engine works, there's a huge force forwards. So now the mystery and paradox are gone. If I consider all the forces involved, the net force on the tractor is forwards, because there's this big force as a result of the wheels. So really, this is the earth pulling it forwards due to friction. If I look at the trailer, the overwhelming dominant force in the trailer is just the tractor pulling it forwards. So therefore, both of these things do go forwards. And that's why Newton's third law is so counterintuitive.